How many doctors does it take to change a light bulb? None, because your average modern-day general practitioner will refer the light bulb to 3 different specialists, forget to file the referral paperwork, then blame the light bulb that nothing gets done, before writing a prescription for vitamin D because the room's still dark. That is a joke that Nate told me today after I got into a verbal disagreement with our new fellow, which I'm not going to get into too much now, because if you've watched my videos before, she's been around for not even 2 weeks, and I've already made like a 27-minute rant video about her, and I'm sure that I'll make more in the future. But the entire joke is just so true that you have to laugh or else you will cry. So instead of going off into a second rant, let's just begin this video by stating a basic truth that no one really wants to acknowledge, but really underpins the reason why that joke hits so hard. Modern day medical school is a scam. Not a scam like a Nigerian prince asking for your banking details or the organic label on a $12 head of lettuce that was grown in the exact same dirt pile as the non-organic stuff. No, this is the kind of scam that's being legitimized by time, by white coats, and by the hollow calls of "you're doing God's work" echoing down the halls of teaching hospitals everywhere. Medical school is a con so elaborate, so deeply entrenched in our societies, that even the people being fleeced come out the other end thanking their con artist for the experience. It is a very long and expensive and meticulously institutionalized pyramid scheme designed to bleed you dry and waste the best years of your life and replace your natural curiosity with a 1,000-yard stare and $300,000 of debt. Let's start with the bare bone basics. There are too many doctors. Nobody likes to say this part out loud because we're supposed to be stuck in a perpetual healthcare crisis, and it sounds blasphemous to suggest there's anything excessive about the noble pursuit of healing the sick. But in reality, believe it or not, statistically speaking, you are much more likely to be cast as the lead role in a Netflix original series about neurosurgeons than ever actually becoming a neurosurgeon in real life. And that's not just because you're a terrible actor, though I'm certain that you are. It's because the numbers simply do not add up. Because there are no jobs. Not really. Not in the specialties that you want to work in or the cities that you want to live in. And on the very, very rare occasion that all the stars align and a job of such a description does open up, you are going to have to claw your way over a mountain of other hopefuls whose CVs all read like wartime confessionals. So let's use neurosurgery as our example again, because who does not love cutting into brains like a socially acceptable serial killer? So every single year, residency programs across the globe churn out thousands of neurosurgeon hopefuls, like they're filling roles as a perpetual Broadway production of Brain Surgery the musical. This is the problem with that. The number of job openings for attending neurosurgeons each year worldwide is in the dozens. And again, that is not per country, that is worldwide, unless you're counting like the ones in rural India or whatever's left over in Cleveland, but seriously. Like, who wants to live in Cleveland? So thousands go in with only a handful coming out being able to secure jobs. So what happens to everyone else? Frankly, for the most part, they get strung along for a few more years. You've got postdocs, research fellowships, clinical observer roles, teaching assistant jobs that pay less than a barista gig and somehow involve more steaming. So who exactly stands to benefit from any of this? Enter the teaching hospitals. The glorious worship teaching hospitals that prop up the entire house of cards. Because think about it for a moment. Why would they ever pay a seasoned neurosurgeon a $500,000 a year salary when instead they can bring in 4 residents who can do double the amount of work with no job security, no benefits, who they can legally pay less than what they would earn as an Uber driver while forcing them to work the kind of hours that would make indented servitude look like a stay at the Ritz-Carlton? The answer is they wouldn't, and they don't. Genius, really. Evil, but genius. So, how exactly do they get away with this? Attending positions are kind of like Venus flytraps. Once a doctor has sunk their claws into the golden goose of one, the administrators will never let them go. It does not matter if they've got tremors, it does not matter if they've got dementia, it does not matter if they've been operating legally blind since the Clinton administration. If they can still utter the phrase, "do a full workup," they're not going anywhere. The system protects them like they're ancient relics from the last great medical war. Because as it turns out, hospitals do not care whether or not you're good at your job, they just care whether you're consistent. And if a doctor's got tenure, it does not matter whether or not he's clinically useless. As long as they can prop him up in a corner and pretend he still works, he's got a job for life. Because if there's one thing that hospitals love more than saving lives, it's saving money. And nothing saves money quite like long-term staff retention. It's not that they can't get rid of these old tenured doctors who are physically incapable of doing their jobs anymore, it's that they won't. Because the more specialists they train, the deeper the pool of desperate residents who are willing to work 90-hour weeks for pennies and prestige becomes. Because prestige, my friends, is the fentanyl crisis of the medical world. Nobody wants to be just a doctor. They want board-certified, fellowship-trained, Harvard-adjacent tattooed on their forehead. Because they think that maybe if they're just special enough, the system won't chew them up and spit them out into some minute clinic somewhere in Northern Ireland, but it will. Because you can't be special these days. Everyone is special. Everyone's a specialist. It's a sexy, overcrowded assembly line churning out junior doctors who are slightly below the cleaning staff in the social hierarchy, way below the nurses, and one misshift away from financial ruin. And all the while, residency slots are stuffed tighter than Foodie Beauty's arteries. Why? Because it keeps the machine running. But let's take a moment to talk about what they're actually teaching. You'd be forgiven for thinking that medical school is where we train people to solve problems and make quick decisions and save lives and, doctor stuff, but no. Instead, we're training algorithmic robots with encyclopedic knowledge on obscure syndromes that haven't seen the light of day since 1862. Back to my fellow, because I can't leave her alone. I hate getting new fellows. For exactly this reason that I'm about to tell you. Over the weekend, I watched her freeze like a deer in headlights because we ran out of ribbon gauze. Not because it was an emergency, not because there was arterial blood spraying the ceiling. No, because her training didn't include thinking.
We need ribbon gauze. There are no ribbon gauze. Short circuit. System failure. Task failed successfully.
So I told her, go get some regular gauze and cut them up into ribbons. And she just stood there staring at me like I just asked her to perform an interpretive dance to the classic Wiggles song Hot Potato. Then asked me, is that allowed? Allowed? Like, this isn't Hogwarts, this is medicine, you do what works, but that's the problem. None of them know what works, they only know what they were told. And if what they were told doesn't match the situation, then they shut down like an emotionally stunted Roomba. Because that's the biggest joke of the entire thing. Your medical system does not teach medicine, it teaches obedience. Memorize this, repeat that. Do not under any circumstances question your attending. Don't question the textbooks. And for the love of God, do not innovate. See, I was trained under a completely different system. Different world, actually. I was trained under socialism, but before you recoil, I could just spat the plague in your face, just hear me out. As I've acknowledged multiple times over the life of my channel, we had a lot of different problems, like a lot of problems. But the one thing that we had that you absolutely do not have in any capacity is that we taught doctors how to be doctors. In order to graduate medical school, like not become a specialist, just simply graduate, you had to prove actual measurable competence across the board. I graduated with a working knowledge of general medicine, dermatology, ophthalmology, ENT, psychiatry, emergency management, burns, urology, trauma. I could put in a chest tube, cut out an appendix, reset a fracture, perform a DNC, tell the difference between someone who was legitimately losing their minds versus an asshole with a Xanax addiction. And all of this was standard, like not extra, not advanced, just standard across the board, because the assumption was, if you were going to work as and call yourself a doctor, you should at least be able to, doctor. Everyone was a surgery. You had to be able to perform standard surgeries to call yourself a doctor, because the way that our medical system worked, again, very different to yours, there was very few big hospitals. Everything was done at your clinic that you were enrolled in. It's not like now where you go to a clinic and the GP spends half his time looking up your symptoms on ChatGPT. You didn't get to be a specialist unless there was a reason, a real one, like the country only needs 4 newly qualified neurosurgeons a decade, and congratulations across the board for the entire decade of graduating classes, you were one of the top 4 candidates. Here, they regularly graduate people who don't know how to even pack a wound, and I do mean that literally. I had a fellow last year, one of my fellows last year, he stared at a polynomial sinus like it was an alien life form. Had no idea how to incise it, didn't know what to do with the pus when it came out, didn't even know which dressing to put on afterwards. And this was the same guy, the same doctor, who could word for word recite 3 different studies into MRSA-resistant patterns in India, yet if his life depended on it, he could not lance a carbuncle. You think I'm exaggerating? Ask a final year medical student to tie a tourniquet. Watch them panic like you just asked them to disarm a nuclear bomb. What exactly happened? And the answer is really quite simple. You taught a generation of doctors how to be specialists before you ever bothered to teach them how to be generalists. See, if you create a system where no one knows how to do anything except for one super hyper-specific task, you create a system of dependency. And it's the kind of dependency where you send a patient on a grand tour of 4 or 5 different specialists just to try to solve one problem that their grandmothers knew how to solve at home using a warm compass and a shot of whiskey. So you've created a system where basic clinical skills are essentially outsourced to whichever department can bill for it most aggressively. You need to lance an abscess? Call general surgery. You want to help manage a yeast infection? Jeez. Well, hopefully gynecology has an opening within the next 6 months. Your patient has a cold? God help you. It's a brilliant system for billing. And before someone jumps down my throat with the whole, but specialization makes for better outcomes, like, yeah, of course it does, in context. If I need somebody to dissect a tumor from my cerebellum, or simultaneously juggling 3 aneurysm clips and giving an a cappella performance to Bohemian Rhapsody, then sure, I don't want a generalist, I want a neurosurgeon. But what you've done is we have inverted the pyramid. There should be no specialization when you can't prove that you mastered the basics. It's ridiculous that you are allowed to play around with a raw spleen when you can't even catheterize a patient with a UTI. It's ridiculous that you're allowed to do a skin graft when you can't even stitch up a leg. It should be a requirement for you to be competent before you are allowed to be clever. But you've reversed it. Your medical schools hand out scalpels and diplomas and hope that luck will walk their doctors through it. Flooding the system with doctors who can read a nuclear scan but can't spot a tension pneumothorax without 3 consults in Indian Sentinel event. It's like training sous chefs who all specialize in parsley, then wondering why nobody can cook a steak. I can't tell you how many times I've done a case consult where there's been 5 specialists swarming around like intellectual piranhas, each taking a bite and swimming away, and none of them doing anything to actually treat the patient.
Oh, the labs are fine.
Oh, the scans looks normal. Oh, Psych says he's just anxious.
Great. Meanwhile, the patient is rapidly dying because no one packed the wound, no one drained the fluid, and no one made a decision. They each just individually did their own little corner of the elephant and left the rest for someone else to deal with. And I know what you're thinking. Casey, if it's such a scam, why did you do it? Well, because I am a nepo baby with a god complex who needs to prove that I'm better than everyone else, and also I knew that I would never make it as a ballerina. But that does not make me wrong. In fact, it probably makes me more right because I came into the system with my eyes wide open. From day one, I got to observe the way that the system straps hopeful young minds to a financial guillotine, all the while telling them how lucky they are to be able to bleed for the cause. And that system is not broken, it is functioning the exact way that it was designed to. It is a slow, grinding conveyor belt that takes 20-year-olds who generally do want to do good in the world and help people, and slowly morphs them into cynical husks of people who, the very, very worst part, can't even do the one thing that they went to school for in the first place. And yet, year after year, thousands upon thousands line up to take their place on the conveyor belt. Because the dream is just that strong. The white coat, the stethoscope, that goddamn doctor title that will make your high school bully regret everything he ever said or did. Except he won't, because your high school bully will be making a 6-figure sum every month, selling crypto scams on the internet while you're 6 years deep into a residency eating a granola bar for dinner in a cold room that smells like dirty feet and broken dreams. Anyway, I think I've made my point, so as always, this is Casey signing off. Stay safe out there, stay weird, and if you're a doctor or a want-to-be doctor for whatever reason after listening to this video, learn how to cut your own ribbon gauze because no one else is going to do it for you.